Hey everybody, it's Mike from InflatableBoarder.com, and today I'm going to be reviewing the iSUP 2-in-1 inflatable stand-up paddleboard and inflatable kayak. Let's get started with some basic information. The iSUP is 11.5 feet long and 35.5 inches wide. It's also the standard 6 inches thick for most inflatable stand-up paddleboards. Now it's a pretty big board, so I definitely had some expectations when I was going into my testing, and those expectations didn't actually pan out, so stick around to find out why. Starting from the inside, we have a brand new woven drop stitch fabric layer with cross-woven drop stitch space yarns. I know that was a lot of jargon, but basically what it means is that the fabric base layer for this board is woven together instead of knitted. Weaving that fabric base layer reduces weight, but also increases stiffness. Additionally, there are thousands and thousands of drop stitch yarns that go between the top and the bottom layers, and that's true for every inflatable stand-up paddleboard. Most of the time, those yarns are straight up and down from top to bottom. With the iSUP, they've actually woven those into an X pattern. That X pattern adds stiffness, but it also reduces weight by reducing the number of yarns that are needed to achieve that stiffness. Onto that woven drop stitch layer, we've got a single layer of fusion PVC material. Now, single layer PVC 10 years ago, 5 years ago, was kind of a no-no. It wasn't really that stiff. It wasn't really that, that ideal for a stand-up paddleboard. But in recent years, these new materials have been coming out, and single layer is no longer a problem for inflatable stand-up paddleboards as long as it's made with the right kind of material, and the switch is made with the right kind of material. The new single layer fusion PVC material, the new woven drop stitch fabric layer, the new cross woven drop stitching, all of that adds up to both an incredibly light board at just 19 pounds, which for a board this size is insane, but it's also still very stiff, bending just over 1.5 inches in our 170-pound bend test, which is well above average. The iSUP is a great example of modern materials, construction techniques, and designs being implemented well to advance the sport of paddleboarding, and it's really exciting to see. So let's get into some of the features on the iSUP. First of all, it's got a 425-pound carrying capacity, which is quite a bit. Again, we can thank that to its size and its stiffness. So 11.5 feet long, 35.5 inches wide, and a very stiff construction means you can put a lot more weight on it. On the board itself, some of the first things you're going to notice are the full-length deck pad and all of these tabs running up and down both sides of the boards. Now, the full-length deck pad here is a brushed EVA, and in the main standing area has these grooves. The grooves help increase traction while you're standing on it, and the brushed EVA foam is nice and soft both on your feet or if you're sitting or laying down on the board. The full-length pad means that you have the entire length of the board covered, which is great if you're carrying passengers, dogs, or you just like to move around on the board, do some yoga, anything like that. Now these tabs are what's referred to as the IO-Link system. There are 40 of these little fabric loops placed up and down the board, and they allow you to customize exactly where you want anything to go on the board. That includes your cargo area bungees. You can take these off and move them around. That means the kayak seat, you can adjust exactly where you want it, forward or backward, or if you're putting 2 seats on it, you can have one up here and one up here. The foot brace that comes with the kayak seat also can be adjusted to match your leg length, so you can get the optimum feel and comfort with that. And of course, anything else you'd like to tie down to the board as well. That's cooler or additional dry bags or cargo areas, anything you want, you can attach through these. One of the other things you're going to see on the board here, it's actually on the bottom here in the middle, is a paddle holder. So a couple of little Velcro tabs that you can use to hold either a spare paddle, or if you're switching between stand-up paddleboarding and sit-down kayaking, you can use that to store the spare piece that comes with your board. Now, speaking of the kayak seat and kayak paddle, let's actually get into what's included with the iSUP when you purchase it. The iSUP package itself includes the board, a nylon carrying case, a single chamber double action hand pump, a coiled ankle or calf leash, a 9-inch touring fin for the US fin box that it has on the bottom, has a paddle. It includes a accessory roll top dry bag, and in that dry bag you'll find a couple of extension straps. We'll get to those in a second. Of course, some stickers. Everybody loves stickers. and a small repair kit. Now this accessory bag can be used as a fully functional dry bag as well, so that's a nice little addition. And again, the Switch does actually include the Kayak Conversion kit, the extra paddle blade, the seat, and the foot brace all in one. Now, the additional straps that they include are so that you can extend the straps on these two accessories if you need to reach a specific spot on the board. I so far have not had to use them. However, they are just a basic nylon strap with a buckle closure on it, so you can actually use them to tie other things down as well. So if you're trying to bring a cooler or a box of fishing gear or anything like that, you could simply use these as well. The paddle that's included with the iSUP is a 4-piece breakdown paddle, and it includes an extra paddle blade as that 4th piece. It's made of aluminum and it has a nylon blade. The blade itself is a little bit on the small side for me for a board this size. It's not a huge deal breaker having that smaller blade, but with a board that's 35 inches wide and 11.5 feet long, you can really load up. Having a smaller blade like this isn't quite as advantageous as having a larger blade. The blade does have a nice scoop to it. It's very user-friendly, very easy to see which way to hold it. You always want to, when you have a scoop, you're going to use the scoop like you would a spoon. And overall, it's actually pretty stiff. There's a little bit of flex right out here in the corners, but the blade itself is pretty stiff. So that's good for better power transfer. Now, the paddle shaft is made of aluminum. And I'm not a fan of aluminum as a material for paddles. Number one, it's heavy. When you're using this paddle as a SUP paddle, it weighs 39 ounces. That's one of the heaviest SUP paddles that I've encountered. And when you use it as a kayak paddle, so these 3 pieces together, it's 51 ounces. When you're just out on the water for a few minutes at a time, it's not a big deal. When you're out on the water all day, those extra ounces really add up. So having a heavier paddle can get really uncomfortable after a while and really tire you out. The other thing with aluminum is that while it is stiff, it also bends. So if you do manage to put this somewhere you're not paying attention, you step on it, the paddle will bend and it's not really gonna bend back. Every time you bend aluminum, it weakens it. So if you try to bend it back, it might actually break, or at least it's gonna weaken the whole system. So that is something to be careful of. The aluminum paddle is just for a kit at this price point and so good on everything else, is just very out of place. They've done some nice things with it. It does have an oval shaft. It's a little bit more ergonomic, especially if you have smaller hands. And they've got this nice grip here on it so it doesn't get too hot or too cold. And it also stays nice and grippy when it's wet. Again, we come up to another kind of cheap component is this molded plastic handle that it just feels so light and so like almost squishy in the hand. And we've got just a little bit of wiggle in this paddle. So as I mentioned in the intro, I had some expectations going into my testing with a board that's this large, and I was actually really impressed with how it performed. So starting off with stability and stiffness. I mentioned already in our bend test that the Switch did really well, bending just over 1.5 inches on our dry land bend test, where we put 170 pounds of weight right here in the middle with some sawhorses about 7 feet apart. So that performed above average. So that was great, especially for such a lightweight board that's made of a single layer PVC material. On the water, that stiffness continued to impress me. I was able to see some moderate flex as I bounced up and down on the board, but while I was paddling or while I was just walking back and forth, it really wasn't noticeable at all. Now for stability, the iSUP performed exactly like I expected it to. This is an incredibly stable board. It's 35.5 inches wide, and it has a 24.5 inch wide tail. So what that means is that we've got a huge amount of width that we can work with, and that width is carried all the way back to give us a large amount of volume. Having a wide square tail like on the Switch allows us to keep that stability even as we move across the board. When you put the board on its edge, or what we call secondary stability, that parallel standing area also gives us really good stability. Putting the board on its edge, you're able to really easily hold it there, which can be a fun little parlor trick to do, but also if you're paddling in choppy conditions or you have boat weight coming by, when your board is moving from side to side, that secondary stability is really important. Now going into this test, 35.5 inch wide board, it's not gonna be very fast, right? Well, I'm happy to report that I was actually very wrong in that assumption. The aisle switch was actually very fast given its width. So when we're talking about speed, I look at that in two different ways. One is the top speed itself, and I test that by doing a 100-meter sprint test. The aisle switch performed in the same range that a lot of boards that are 32 inches wide do. It's about 42, 43 seconds for a 100-meter sprint. That really kind of shocked me. I checked my clock, right? And it's just a very fast board. I was very impressed with it. The other way that I evaluate speed is by looking at how efficient the board is on the water in what we call our glide test. And so what I mean by glide is how far it'll go on a single paddle stroke. And what I've found in my testing is that the switch glides essentially as well as a lot of dedicated touring paddle boards. So these dedicated touring paddle boards are actually usually longer, usually in the 12.5-foot length range, and also narrower, anywhere from 32 down to 29 inches wide. And what we typically see with those touring boards is that with each paddle stroke, you can expect the board to glide about 2 board lengths before it really starts to slow down. And usually on these wider all-around paddle boards like the Switch, you're only gonna get about 1.5. Maybe 1.7 if you've got a real good one. The Switch actually broke that 2 paddle board length glide mark. So that's actually really impressive. This is a board that I would not hesitate to go take on a expedition style tour where I needed something that was wide for stability, has a lot of carrying capacity, and can really keep the board moving without a whole lot of extra effort. So the next test that I put every board through is a maneuverability and a tracking test. So maneuverability is how well you can turn the board or steer the board as you're paddling, and tracking is how well you can keep the board going straight. For the maneuverability test, I'll count the number of strokes it takes me to move the board in a full circle while standing still. And again, 11.5 feet long, 35.5 inches wide, I'm expecting this thing to take a pretty big turning radius, but I was once again wrong, and it really only took about 5.5 strokes to turn a complete circle. Again, that's something that we'd expect to see in shorter boards and narrower boards. So the performance there with the maneuverability was very good. Now there's a lot of other ways to turn a board, a lot of other strokes you can use. You can do a step back or a pivot turn as well. And while pivot turning on this board, again, that full length deck pad does go all the way to the tail, so you've got nice traction all the way back. The wide tail gives you good stability as you swing the board around. So once again, performed very well there. With such good maneuverability, I expected the tracking to really take a nosedive. And once again, I was wrong about the aisle switch. It actually did very well in our test and deviated just on average about 12 degrees from its course. Again, not quite touring board level where we're closer to see like 5, 6 degrees, but definitely on the higher end of all-arounds for sure. As I mentioned earlier, the aisle switch is actually called the iSUP 2-in-1 inflatable stand-up paddleboard. That's because it's designed to be used as both an inflatable stand-up paddleboard and as a kayak. To that, aisle included their Kayak Conversion kit with the switch. You don't have to buy it separate, it is included. And with that, you get an additional paddle blade, you get a foot brace, and you get the kayak seat. Now, one thing right away that's different about this kayak seat, this Kayak Conversion kit compared to a lot of others on the market, is that the seat itself is actually made of drop stitch inflatable material, just like the board is. Most Kayak Conversion seats are made of thin foam, and they sit directly on the board. With the inflatable seat here, it's actually 4 inches thick, and it lifts you up off the board a little bit. And that is super important for the ergonomics of kayaking. The seat also has a nice brush EVA foam surface on it as well, so you're not sitting directly on that PVC material. And the foot brace also has that same brush EVA foam surface on it as well. Now, the foot brace here is actually a pretty important part to having an efficient kayak setup. It does a couple of things. One, it's comfort. As you're sitting here on your butt on a flat surface, when your legs are straight out in front of you, it puts a lot of strain on your hamstrings, and it's not super comfortable for long periods of time. You end up needing to cross your legs or do something else in order to kind of give yourself a little bit of relief through your hips and in your legs. The other thing, I do need to snug it up just a little bit, there we go, is that the brace here, it is a brace. So you can actually press against it. And one of the commonalities between kayaking and paddleboarding is that you do want to use your core and your whole body to propel yourself through the water. Otherwise, your arms are going to get really tired. So when we're stand-up paddleboarding, we're using our hips. We're doing that hip hinge. When we're kayaking, we typically do a little bit more of a rotation, and we're still using our legs and our torso. Now the paddle itself, the middle section of the shaft is symmetrical, so it doesn't matter which end the paddle blade goes into. All you have to do is align the tab here with the hole here. And you're set up. These paddle blades, these are very much a SUP paddle blade. These are designed to be used vertically like this, where the paddle goes in the water, okay? Straight up and down, just like this. And they work really well for that. When you have this symmetrical shape like this, what can happen is you'll have too much pressure on one side and not enough on the other, and it causes the blade to flutter as you pull through, all right? Now, for casual paddling, it works just fine. My grip, again, just kind of right here on these little buttons. So not the most comfortable thing for me. If you do anticipate kayaking a lot with your Switch or really any paddleboard, I highly recommend getting a kayak paddle. It's gonna be more efficient to paddle with, okay? And it's gonna be more comfortable. So if you've made it this far, you've probably figured out that there's a lot that I like about the iSwitch. There are a couple of things that I do think could be improved though. Starting off with, you've guessed it, the paddle. The biggest improvement that ISLE could make to the Switch is to give us a composite paddle. Whether that's carbon fiber or fiberglass, either would be a massive improvement over the aluminum paddle shaft. So for iSwitch version 2, let's hope we can get a composite paddle in here. The next thing that could be improved upon with the iSwitch is that there's no accessory attachment point other than the ISLE link tabs. While those do a great job for tying things down, they don't necessarily do a great job with other things like fishing rods or cameras or GPS units or anything like that. The single chamber pumps, they definitely do the job. They work just fine. But a double chamber pump makes it so much easier to inflate, especially for smaller paddlers trying to get those last few pounds of pressure in the board, that it would be a really nice upgrade to see. And finally, this is super nitpicky, but that's kind of where I'm at with the Switch, is I have to get nitpicky to find things to improve, is I'd like to see a longer bungee cord. There is a adjustable cleat mechanism where you can tighten it up and loosen it down, but there's really not a lot of room to loosen it. So if you are trying to pack for an overnight trip, there may not really be enough room under that bungee to fit all of your dry bags. In addition to all of the physical items you get with the iSwitch, ISLE also includes a 2-year warranty on the Switch itself, as well as all their other inflatable paddleboards. Now with the other items, the pump, the bag, paddle, the seat, all of that, you only get a 1-year warranty, but that's actually really, really good. In the SUP industry, we typically see accessories either have no warranty at all, or you might get 30, 60, or maybe 90 days warranty support for those type of products. But all of the accessories with the iSwitch do have a 1-year warranty. So if you are looking at the iSwitch and trying to figure out, is this a good deal? Is this a good value? You might look at the price tag and see that it is a little bit higher than some other options that are available. But you have to keep in mind that not only are you getting the 2-year warranty on the board, the 1-year warranty on the accessories, you are getting an excellent accessory kit, including a fantastic kayak conversion kit, but also the board itself being made with some of the most advanced materials and construction that we have available today, and performing incredibly well, and not just for a wide board, not just for a large board, but just in general, the Switch actually performs very well on the water. Overall, when you're looking at it, the Switch offers a fantastic value, especially if you are considering getting a kayak conversion kit for your stand-up paddleboard. So who is the iSwitch for? The iSwitch can really be used by any paddler. It has plenty of stability for beginners. It's got a ton of cargo capacity, stiffness, and glide for people loading up for an overnight adventure. It's a great all-around board. It's actually fairly quick, and it makes a great kayak conversion as well. I think the only paddler that wouldn't have a great time on the Switch is the dedicated paddleboard angler. There's not a lot of attachment options specifically for equipment other than just the aisle link tabs, but for everyone else, beginners, intermediate, and even advanced paddlers would all have a great time paddling the aisle switch. Overall, I was incredibly impressed with the aisle switch during my testing, and I've since taken it out for personal use several times. It's definitely one of those boards that I'm comfortable putting a beginner on, or taking for myself and my dog, or really just having on hand to use for any number of purposes. It's lightweight, it packs down into a relatively small bag, and it's got the excellent kayak conversion. So there's a lot of great uses for the Switch, and the performance was just above and beyond what I expected for a board of this size. If you'd like to learn more about the iSUP, head on over to InflatableBoarder.com, where you can read our full in-depth review. We've got dozens of photos, lots of in-depth information about the board and its performance, and of course reviews on other boards that you can compare it to. If you have any questions or comments about the Switch, feel free to leave them below. And while you're down there, go ahead and let us know what board you'd like to see us review next, and then make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can be notified when it comes out. Thanks for watching, and safe paddling.